Hi and welcome everyone to a very special event in the Talking Animals Law and Philosophy series. Today we're launching the new book of Paula Casal and Peter Singer called The Rights of Apes. My name is Raphael Fizel and I am the Executive Director of the Cambridge Centre for Animal Rights Law. Those of you who are attending the Talking Animals series regularly will have noticed that the format is slightly different this time around. So we're running this as a webinar, meaning that the panelists cannot see the attendees, but the other way around, that should be working. We're also going to have a bit of a different format. So instead of a talk followed by a discussion, we're going to have a comment provided by Carolina Leiva-Ilabaka, whom I'll be introducing shortly. That will then be followed by a conversation between the two book authors and me. And toward the end of the 1-hour event, we will have around 15 minutes time for a discussion where you are very much invited to come in with comments and questions. If you do have any questions or comments that you'd like to raise or make, please use the Q&A function that you find at the bottom of your Zoom app, and I can then feed your questions directly to our panelists. We are also recording this event, so if you'd like to watch it later or if you'd like to send it to a friend, you can do that. I will upload it to our website in a few days' time. Okay, with this out of the way, it is now my great pleasure to introduce our distinguished panelists today. We have with us Paula Casal, who is professor at the Catalan Institution for Research and Advanced Studies and at Pompeu Fabra University. Paula has previously worked at Oxford, Keele, Harvard, Louvain-la-Neuve, and Stanford Universities. She is an associate editor of Politics, Philosophy, and Economics, the co-director of the Center for Animal Ethics at Pompeu Fabra, and she's also the president of the Great Ape Project in Spain. Paula's work has appeared in numerous journals, including Ethics, the Journal of Moral Philosophy, the Journal of Political Philosophy, and Utilitas, among others. She's also the author of Un reporto más justo del planeta, published by Trotta in 2016, and co-authored with Thomas Pogge and Hillel Steiner. Our other panelist today is Peter Singer, who is Ira de Camp Professor of Bioethics at the University Center for Human Values at Princeton University. Now, he's previously worked at Oxford, New York, La Trobe, and Monash University, and Peter has been described as one of the world's most influential living philosophers, and in 2005, Time magazine listed him among the 100 most influential people in the world. Peter is the author, as I'm sure everyone will know, of Animal Liberation, which was first published in 1975 and is currently in its 3rd edition. It's also been published and translated into 24 other languages. Peter's also authored Practical Ethics, which first came out in 1979 and is also in its 3rd edition and has been translated into 18 languages and has been included among the 100 most important philosophical texts ever. Peter is the author and co-author, editor or co-editor of over 40 books, including his recent Why Vegan, published with Penguin 2020, which I recently read, which is a really great read. Now, we're honored that Paula and Peter have chosen the Talking Animals Law and Philosophy series to launch their new book, The Rights of Apes, or indeed in Spanish, Los Derechos de los Simios, published with Trotta in 2022, this year. Here with us today to help celebrate the launch of this amazing book is Carolina Leiva-Ilabaka, who has kindly offered to provide a summary on the book, which will be very helpful because the book is only available in Spanish at the moment, if I understand correctly. So for those of you who don't read Spanish like I, these comments will be very helpful, and Carolina will have some other thoughts on the book as well that she's going to share with us. She is a PhD candidate in law at the University of Chile and the University Autónoma de Barcelona. Carolina works on a project looking into animal subjecthood and whether animals can be considered victims under criminal law. And perhaps most importantly, in spring this year, Carolina was also visiting researcher at the Cambridge Centre for Animal Rights Law. So it's great to have her back. Carolina, I'm now handing over to you for your summary and your comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Rafael. Well, hello, everyone. I hope you can listen to me well. First of all, I would like to thank to the Center for this kind invitation and of course, felicitate the authors for the book. I will divide my presentation in two parts. Firstly, since probably, as Rafael said, most of the audience have not read yet the book, which is only available in Spanish for now, I will deliver a general summary of its contents. And secondly, I will provide respectfully some comments on the text, aiming to open the discussion that is coming afterwards. Well, first of all, it has to be noted that the book, composed of several chapters organized in 5 parts, contains some material from previous publications. As the authors indicate, there are new texts as well as modified versions of previous text, either updated, summarized, or complemented. Some chapters have been written individually by one of the authors, while others have been written jointly. The first part of the book is about the notion of rights, and it is composed by 3 chapters. Chapter 1 explains the 3 basic rights that the Great Apes Project demand, which are life, liberty, and freedom from torture. Chapter 2 presents the problem of rights and the species barrier. Chapter 3 deals with the various philosophical debates on the notion of subjective rights. Part 2 in turn deals with the concept of persons from a philosophical perspective, mostly. Here, chapter 4 provides arguments for the consideration of great apes as persons, and chapter 5 addresses the accusation of speciesism on anthropocentrism that fall under the project. Part 3, entitled Evolution, contains perhaps the most robust chapter on moral philosophy, in which Professor Singer challenges Franz de Waal's arguments against the idea of morality as lining, linking this to the granting of rights to hominids. In chapter 7, Professor Casal emphasizes how our planet without free apes able to pass on their own culture is really a planet without apes at all. Part 4 is about the laws. Firstly, developing the idea on how depriving apes from their freedom is a kind of prison, to afterwards present the case of Guillermo, a chimpanzee confined in the Canary Island, and how, in this case, neither the Spanish legislation of the time, which is started in 2006, nor its authorities were efficient enough to release him from his captivity, demonstrating the urgent need for a specific legislation to protect great apes. Part 5 finally discusses the propositions, arguing in favor of the proposed 3 basic rights, as already said, and reviewing the non-legal proposals that have been discussed in Spanish Congress of Deputies. The non-legal proposals are kind of not laws that can be presented for a demand, a declaration of the deputies. In the epilogue entitled The Apes, Better and Worse Than Ever, the authors argues that their proposal is moderate and plausible, as the protection of hominids do not raise great opposition, and that they are in extreme danger, which makes sense since today it will be impossible to grant such rights to other animals that are used for food or experimentation, for instance. Finally, the book includes an appendix presenting in greater detail the characteristic of the various species of hominids. And I found this section a great contribution because it allows a better understanding of their mental capacities. I think it would have been great to read this section at the beginning of the book because it really makes the arguments stronger and more compelling. And concerning the book motivations, we can identify different goals. As general objectives, we can notice the intention to take up urgently the call for protection of hominids through the granting of 3 basic rights. Basic rights, as I said, the right to live, to be free, and not to be tortured, which in their negative perspective implies the prohibition to kill them, to confine them, and to torture or mistreat them. To achieve this, the book promotes the work of the Great Ape Project, and in this case, specifically the work of the Spanish Grade A project. It is a philosophical book, not a legal book, although with a clear ambition to produce legal changes and public policies as well. Through the book, the argument about the great apes, mental capacities, and their proximity to those of humans, their genetic closeness, and how this imposes the moral imperative of considering them moral persons and right holders is constantly repeated. Finally, some particular comments to open the debate, if I may. First of all, if the book aims to make more people consider the idea of hominid rights plausible, it seems that the mission is accomplished. But I wonder, is this enough to convince the legislator? And this I have some doubts and as well some ideas. Firstly, concerning the effectiveness of philosophical arguments on legal grounds. Certainly, it is clear from the book, as well from the project, that arguments of moral philosophy are used in order to achieve legal changes. Nevertheless, it seems that while these arguments could be solid, they have not had a positive reception like immediately in legal practice. On this matter, it seems important to point out that, as it is true, as the authors notice in the book, that scientific data is not in itself a moral imperative, it is also true, I think, that in the same way, a philosophical argument is not per se a legal argument. And this can be seen in two matters. On the one side, regarding the specificities of law, and on the other, the strong paradigms that still present among societies and evidently among stakeholders. On the first matter, the experience has shown that a philosophical reason do not translate automatically into a legal reason, or put differently, moral arguments are not per se legal arguments, so they need to be fleshed out in legal terms. Consequently, I think it could be a good idea to translate or to accompany philosophical arguments into or with arguments of legal plausibility in order to convince decision makers. For instance, an argument of this sort could be that there is no need to be a person to hold legal rights because animals, not being legal persons, are already the legalata holders of some legal rights to their philosophical and mental integrity, for instance. This argument has been largely developed in the last years for several authors, and it is a legal argument that scratches directly where it itches, the granting of legal rights. On the second matter, it seems to be that, to a large extent, the difficulties that animal legal rights comes from the anthropocentric paradigms strongly rooted in law and in society, which poses an impenetrable defensive barrier to any comparison between humans and non-human animals. To avoid this barrier, I think it could be helpful to elude maybe the kind of arguments that stresses these comparisons, because even when they can be correct from a philosophical perspective, they sound somehow violent or maybe disrespectful, and that therefore not able to convince precisely the stakeholders who needs to be convinced. Maybe just a focus on the notion of interest, science, for instance, could be sufficient to do the work. Finally, a last idea concerning the accusation of speciesism. Despite the fact that there are strong moral reasons for granting rights to hominids, and that the authors themselves on the book declare their sympathy towards our species rights holding, it seems that the strong appeal they make to the mental capacities of hominids as the reason for rights ascription might undermine any possibility of ascribing rights to other animals, as it suggests that those animals who do not possess those mental capacities should not have rights. This is, of course, problematic for the ascription of any rights to other animals, and there is something maybe to look at too. Well, this is all. Thank you very much for your attention. And again, thanks and congratulations to the authors for this new contribution. I'm looking forward to hear from you.
Thank you very much, Carolina. That was very interesting and very helpful too. Paula, Peter, would you like to respond to Carolina's comments?
Paula, do you want to go first? I'm happy to respond but happy for you to go first.
Okay. So in Spain, it is certainly the case that philosophy has had a massive impact on developing animal rights and the rights of great apes in particular. It was because Garrido had read the first book, The Great Ape Project, that he put forward the first resolution in Parliament in 2005. And the same is true of Joan Herrera, who studied here in Barcelona, and he was taught by my friend Jorge Richman, who, because of me, had heard a lot about the rights of great apes, and that's how he persuaded his party to go for this. So I know, even like in specific cases, that it was the reading of a text by Peter or Paula and Peter that it has resulted in the legal changes. Also, at the moment, we are seeing like a revolution in Latin America with about 40 cases where animals are being considered to have legal personhood, and in Spain is a legal revolution. I mean, we went from a total disaster as a country in terms of legislation for animals to the creation of the General Direction for the Defense of Animals, which is part of the Ministry of Social Rights and Agenda 2030. And they are completely going through all of the laws in Spain and adjusting them so that they take animals into account. So there's been a revision of civil law so that animals can be members of the family. There's now a very, very radical, a completely different law protecting domestic animals. There is nothing like the previous one, having prohibitions on sales of many species. Is changed completely, and it's because of these people who are in government working on new legislation that have read Peter and other people arguing for animal rights. So I have no doubt that this is one area of philosophy that where the work of philosophers has had a very big impact. It's true that there are other routes to defending animal rights in general, but we never say that this is the way or the only way. And it's good that different people explore different avenues and different things work in different juridical systems. Like in Spain, it will be impossible now to have an habeas corpus, and in Latin America, we are seeing them all the time. On the other hand, we already had 3 defenses in Parliament, which had not happened in other countries. So you have to exploit whatever any legal system gives you to go forth, and having a variety of strategies is better than having only one way. So I welcome other arguments for animal rights, but they don't exclude other strategies. I didn't understand why some arguments were violent, or there's something speciesist about saying that the death of individuals who have psychological contiguity, planning, a sense of themselves, and so on, is particularly bad. I don't think that this is speciesist, and I didn't understand your claim about violent arguments.
Do you want to clarify, Carolina? I know that you had a particular example in mind, didn't you? Maybe you could just mention that. That might help.
Yeah, no, there was two different issues. One regarding like that I have called it elsewhere, like the nose wrinkling argument, which is like when there are so strong paradigms, strongly rooted paradigms of anthropocentrism. That's it, absolutely clear. On stakeholders, I mean, and I worked as a lawyer and attorney for many years, and advising politicians as well, and presenting myself in front of judges. And I always saw this kind of, when you speak about animal rights or animals as persons, or even, please, they are capable to suffer. I put all of them together to say that there could be some ways to say the same thing, but in a less violent for them way, but it is just a more strategic way for us. That was all the point about the violent way. Because as they are strongly rooted in their hearts or souls or whatever, or minds, it's at the end, it does not really help too much, even when the argument is correct, just because they like put all the barriers, like, oh, no, you cannot say that, you cannot say. And the other one about the speciesism, it is not saying that it is, it's saying that maybe when the argument is made so strongly regarding the argument for hominid rights, so strongly on how they are so much capable than the other animals about consciousness and mental faculties, etc., it sounds, or it can make the claim for the other animals a little more difficult. That was what I said. It's like to open the discussion, as I said.
Okay, so perhaps I can comment on these points. When Paula Cavalieri and I started the Great Ape Project almost 30 years ago, our idea was that it would actually bridge the gulf between humans and other animals, that by bringing great apes within the sphere of beings who have rights, or we use the phrase within the community of equals, beings with whom there's a kind of fundamental basic equality between us, that instead of this idea that there are just humans on the one side and then there are all these other animals on the other side, which of course is a completely unscientific idea anyway. We are animals and there's a continuum, and the great apes are more closely related to us than other animals, but it is a continuum. So we hope that in fact this would be a bridge, in the sense of it would make it easier to cross the bridge to the other animals as well, not only to the great apes or the hominids. And we did get some pushback of the kind that you are suggesting, Carolina, that maybe it will lead to the idea that somehow you have to have these highly, cognitive abilities of self-awareness and so on. But I don't really think that that's right. And what I'm seeing is, on the one hand, some progress with great apes of the kind that Paula Casal mentioned, but also I think more interest and awareness in the capacities of other animals. So just today, actually, the New York Times, or maybe it was yesterday, the New York Times had an article about research done at Farm Sanctuary in the United States on the cognitive abilities of farmed animals, including chickens. And I think a month or two ago, National Geographic had a cover story about the capacities and the emotional lives of other animals, not focusing on great apes. So I think there is more awareness now that even if great apes maybe are different from many other animals, that there is this continuum. And we hope that there won't be this sort of speciesism or hominidism, I suppose you could call it, I don't know, that suggests that only hominids somehow have this special status, but that it will come across. So that's one point. The other point about the use of claims for rights, which you say the judges sort of wrinkle their noses at, or whatever the facial expression that you made. I'm wondering whether you wouldn't agree that we have made some progress here. Not huge progress. Of course, we would have all liked to make more progress. But there has been progress in Latin America and some of these cases being accepted. And I was actually positively surprised by the result in the case that was brought here about Happy the elephant in the Bronx Zoo, that got to the highest court that a habeas corpus writ for an animal has ever got in any English-speaking country. That is the highest court in the New York State system. And although the application was denied, there were 2 judges out of 7 on the court who actually dissented and said that they would have accepted this. And that's what positively surprised me, that there are now judges, even in the more conservative English-speaking judiciaries, I think, that are prepared to say, yes, a habeas corpus writ can work for a non-human animal. So it's not as quick as we would like, as I said, but this is a quite dramatic change. It took a long time to get various groups of humans recognized as equals. Get blacks recognized as equals in the United States, to get women recognized as equals in most countries, and in fact, unfortunately, still not the case in some countries. So it's in a way, perhaps, when I was younger, I was a little too optimistic, a little bit naive about how difficult this would be. But now I'm satisfied if I feel we're moving in the right direction and we can make progress and support these initiatives. And we certainly hope, as Paula just said, that we will get some progress in Spain with the proposals about laws for great apes. I'm not too pessimistic about the approach that we're taking. I think it, as Paula just said, it shouldn't be the only approach. We welcome others, but I do think that it may help us to make progress.
That's very interesting, Peter and Paula. And if I can come in here, maybe take over the discussion. I was just interested in hearing a bit more about your motivation for writing this particular book. Does it have to do with the fact that, yes, we're seeing these changes in Latin America? Does it have to do with, sort of the animal science side of things changing rapidly? So what has led you to writing this new book together now? Maybe what's changed from 1993 or so, when Peter, you and Paula Cavalieri wrote the Great Ape Project?
I think, Paula, you should answer that, because it is a book in Spanish, as Rafael said, and I think it is a response to events in the Spanish-speaking world. So Paula is better able to speak about that than I am.
Well, a lot of things have changed in 30 years. So we have a lot of scientific information we didn't have at the time about the great apes, not just about their capacities, but also how many species there are and how endangered each of the species is. Because when you consider that there are several species of gorillas, then you realize how endangered they are, because they are separate species. So a lot of things have changed scientifically. Many things have also changed legally. And this was like our opportunity to take advantage of two things. One is all these legal developments, which were very largely inspired by the Great Ape Project, with so many people going for habeas corpus or other legal proceedings that presuppose legal personhood, but they are not habeas corpus, which have also been mushrooming lately. And also our political situation, because having Sergio García Torres in the Dirección General de Derechos del Animal and the current government is a unique possibility. If many people fear the Conservatives will win, and so if we don't do it now, it might never happen. So it was very important to finish it, and finish it in time, because we are now, during the fall, discussing the proposal. Everything has been delayed because the new law for the protection of domestic animals, and it doesn't include wild animals, no, because the people involved in drafting it were not interested in wild animals, but it has something to do with the competences of the Ministry of Social Rights, that it couldn't. It would be overstepping its legislative capacity, but it is really an amazing improvement from what we had. And some people in the Socialist Party who are hunters have boycotted this, and they want hunting dogs to be excluded, or else they are sort of creating a lot of problems for the for these laws to pass through. And as a result of the delay on this new law on domestic animals, which will go through with or without the hunting dogs, but this has delayed the new step, because after the law of domestic animals, the next one is the law on the great apes. No? So they have a team working on it, and they've been receiving proposals from all the affected parties. But we expect a sort of national debate in January.
Got it. That's very interesting. And I want to actually come back to that, sort of proposal that I know at least partly springs from the book, sort of toward the end of my my comments. But maybe just before we get there, I'd like to talk to you a bit more or ask you a bit more about some of the more foundational questions. And I guess one of the questions I'm sure you're being asked all the time is, why the Great Apes? Is it because you're building on the success of the Great Ape Project? Is it because you think there's any particular reasons why we should not look at cetaceans or elephants or other animals? Is it strategic? Is it philosophical? Is it both? Can you just talk to us a bit about that? I'm sure lots of people will be interested in that question.
Yeah, I suppose I would say it is largely strategic for me, as I said, as it was when we launched the Great Ape Project itself 30 years ago. It certainly didn't mean that I was less interested in trying to improve the lives of pigs or chickens or other animals. I've continued to do that, and I am currently working on a complete update and revision of animal liberation, which will be published next year. So I'm very much interested in that. But as I said, I do think that there's kind of public sympathy for great apes. When we watch documentaries about great apes, we kind of recognize their expressions, their emotions, what they're doing. We can relate to them very well. In addition, we don't have to get defensive and think, oh dear, if I'm too sympathetic to this animal, I won't be able to continue eating things that I'm in the habit of eating for dinner. So that's another advantage, I think, of working with great apes. Now, some of those things could be said about cetaceans, perhaps, but in terms of reading their faces and expressions, it's not quite as easy. And there are particular problems with great apes in captivity. Of course, there are, not that there aren't problems with cetaceans, but I think some of those problems are more direct. We're more aware of them with great apes. So this does seem to me to be something that is very much worth doing, and as I said, can be a bridge to other animals as well.
That makes a lot of sense. Paula, unless you wanted to come in on this one, I had another more foundational question on the three particular rights you choose to focus on. So we have the right to life, to liberty, and bodily integrity. And I think in the book, as far as I get it from my Google translations, you do call them negative rights. And it's true, of course, they are generally seen as negative rights. They're rights sort of to non-interference with regard to these things. Why did you not include, say, positive rights, say a right to family life? Is that, again, for more strategic reasons, or are there philosophical reasons that make you think that actually we should just focus on negative rights for now?
Well, I wanted to say something about the previous point first. I agree that especially when it comes to cetaceans and elephants, there's very little reason to focus only on the Great Apes, but all the work on the Great Ape Project has been immensely beneficial for defending elephants and cetaceans. I mean, Lori Marino, for example, who is devoted to defending cetaceans, has been using constantly material developed for the defense of apes, and the conditions in which they are, and the mental disorders that they are suffering. Orcas, for example, are really very similar. So I think, yes, the argument is strategic, but there are also differences. And when you tell people, tell me some reasons why it would be bad to kill you or any human being, it's really quite difficult to come up with a reason for, not killing a human being that doesn't apply to apes. But if you say, all other animals, then there would be reasons not to kill human beings that do not apply to all animals. So if you ask people, because I give so many talks on the Great Ape Project in schools and in many places, and that has a massive impact on people when you say, well, tell me, what would be really bad to, and then they said, my family, my friends, blah, 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 and you tell them, well, they have friends, they have families, almost everything they come up with, you can refer. It's not the same in the case of other animals with regards to death and with regards to imprisonment, no? I think it makes a difference that you are in prison, you resent that condition, you resent your captors, and you're not like some animals that cannot really tell the difference between the pond where they live and the pond where they are captive. No? So there are various things that make a difference. And for what Peter was saying, sort of letting people who are already concerned with human rights and with humans build on that and make them extend to other animals, it is an excellent bridge. And then from apes, you go to elephants and cetaceans, and then, then you carry on, And why negative? Well, I think these were the most urgent, and least controversial rights, and they happen to be negative, and generally people accept negative rights more easily. And so, and also Paula also has this view that she wanted to use Thomas Pogge's conception of human rights as a short list of very basic minimal negative rights that the state had to guarantee. So it helped with her claim of human rights for animals. I am not, I don't have even a little bit of libertarian in me, and no concern with this division between negative and positive, or any idea that you can only go for negative rights. So, and sometimes in practice, it is very difficult, because after you have violated their negative rights and you have them in a cage, you have to feed them, you have to give them veterinary attention, you have to provide them with all of these things that we normally think are positive rights. So, it's just it's Paula's legacy, but it works.
Yes.
Yes, I think that's right, and I think politically it would have been more difficult to argue for positive rights. I think it was easier to defend the idea of rights to life, liberty, and protection from torture than to say that they have a right to be part of a family, because then people would say, well, what does that mean? What are we obliged to do if there is a family group but one of them dies? Do we have to find another? How do we do that? It just becomes more complicated. And as given the very backward stage that we're in terms of these discussions, we thought making a simple claim for 3 rights that everybody would agree were very basic, and making, not saying that we were claiming the same rights for great apes as we were claiming for human beings in general, or as the UN Declaration of Human Rights proclaims, or anything like that, I think made the project more politically acceptable.
That makes sense. So actually I had a question on sort of why you went for this rights framework. Now, we're of course the Center for Animal Rights Law, so we do think the idea of rights is a very interesting one, of course, but I was struck by something you wrote in the introduction, in fact, where you reflected briefly on why you chose the title, Rights of Apes. And I think how you explain it there is, well, essentially we take a sort of big tent approach, a sort of broad church approach. At the end of the day, what we care about is that we can convince people to save the apes, right? Whether they do so in terms of moral rights terminology or obligations or legal protections, that doesn't matter so much. The primary thing is to convince people to save the apes. If that's a fair summary of what you're saying, and again, it's Google Translate giving me this, then I wonder whether someone might potentially want to challenge your use of the rights framework, because rights, as Carolina was suggesting in her comments, sometimes aren't received very well, at least by some people. The idea of giving animals rights in a sort of strict sense, close to human rights, some people are opposed to, whereas the idea of animal welfare, extending existing protections, that's something I think faces less resistance. So given that fact, and given that your goal seems to be to want to convince people to save the apes, why go for the rights framework that seems to be targeted to a narrower audience and that may face more resistance than other terminologies? Who would like to?
So I can say something about that if Paula isn't jumping in. So for me, obviously as a utilitarian, rights are not fundamental. I don't start with the notion of rights. So I disagree with some other philosophers who do, like the late Tom Regan. We had, we worked together on a number of things and projects, and co-edited a book, Animal Rights and Human Obligations. But for Tom, rights were where he started from. For me, rights were where I ended up in terms of saying, well, in two different ways. For one, I think that the terminology of rights has become well entrenched in the societies in which I live, and generally speaking, I think certainly in the Western world, and almost any cause gets put in terms of rights. So if you're going to say, I think that we should give animals equal consideration for similar interests that they have with humans, that's a radical claim which many people will just automatically think, oh, so that means you're in favor of animal rights. And I don't want to, certainly not when making political arguments, I don't want to get into the fine details of whether rights are the foundation or whether rights are something that, as utilitarians would say, are things that it's desirable to have accepted in a society, either through law or through social convention and social pressure, and that provide areas where, in the sense of negative rights anyway, where we think outsiders should leave people alone, not interfere with them in ways that violate their rights, and positively, perhaps, with it, we have obligations to do certain things for them. So I'm prepared to use rights as a kind of a shorthand for things that you could say follow from the idea that they're sentient beings, that they have interests, that their interests should not be discounted because they're not members of our species. And for me, that's enough to say, if it's useful to frame them in terms of rights, then let's do that. So it is, as we say in the book, it's a kind of a broad tent that you want to get everybody in, whether they're only talking about rights in the positive sense of legal rights or socially accepted rights, or whether they're talking of rights as the foundation. I think we can still use this language, and I think it helps people to sort of get very quickly what we're talking about, and ultimately may help with the kind of legislation that we want as well.
Got it. That's very interesting. Paula, did you want to come in on this one too, or would you like to move on to something else?
No, I just wanted to add that this has to be part of the project of breaking the species barrier. So if humans have rights, and then we have these creatures that are so similar to human children who also already have rights, why can't we also say that they have rights? At least make it as a conditional. If this creature has a right, this very similar creature, why not? No, at least making people think about that. No.
Yes,
exactly. I agree.
Achieve that. Yes. Now, conscious of time, I want to leave enough time for questions from the audience, and I would encourage everyone to type their questions or comments into the Q&A so we can pick them up later. But before we move to that part of the event, I want to ask one last question and come back to something I sort of shelved earlier in response to what Paula was saying about some of the proposals that are currently being discussed in Spain. And I was just wondering, Paula or Peter too, if you want to come in on this, whether you could talk to us about the hominid law, for instance, that you sent me, that you're currently working on, and what sorts of projects we can see forthcoming, springing from the book potentially.
Well, it is, you know, it's a 2-page that I send you, but it has a lot of different things. So I'll say only one thing. There are some points in the list which I don't think they're going to be controversial, and we will definitely win. For example, we have to finish private possession. And this has been one of the big problems in Spain, that during Franco, to encourage tourism, Franco brought a lot of apes into Spain, and all of the beaches of Spain had the chimpanzee chain for people to take photographs. All of these chimpanzees then had children in conditions that were terrible, and so the mothers had deep psychological problems and no culture. They couldn't look after their children. They were just stressed by them, didn't know what to do, didn't even know how to breastfeed. So they were given by private individuals, and that is how private possession has spread, and the government lost sight of all of them. And we've been, since 1998, finding them and recovering them and putting them in sanctuaries. So that I am confident that that is going to be agreed, that we have to put an end to either private possession or zoos which do not even, you know, begin to satisfy the minimal conditions for them to live there. No? Then there are other things which I found difficult myself, like the end of captive breeding, because I have seen some cases where they have lost their babies, for example, and how devastated they were, and how adopting even happened to Washo. No? Adopting and having a baby is maybe the only thing that is good that happens to those females caged their entire life. When they have the baby is the only time that, you know, you could call happy in some way, and so it is difficult. But of course, if we are going to condemn these babies to living in a cage forever, and also the zoo population is becoming so inbred that many of them don't have very good health as a result of the, you know, lack of genetic diversity. So I found that one difficult, but having talked to a lot of people about this because I was so concerned, I have become convinced that on balance, it is better to recommend that we end the captive breeding than that we continue.
That's very interesting. Thank you, Paula. Unless Peter would like to come in on this, I would.
No, I think I'm happy to leave it at that point and get some questions from the audience.
Very good. Yes, so we've got some in the Q&A now, and let's start with the first one. And I think I could say answer live. That will move it to everyone. This is a question basically about the role that religion plays. Do you think that there are religions that really pose an obstacle to what you want to do? Is there a certain anthropocentrism inherent in those religious frameworks? Or in fact, are there some religious frameworks that are allies rather than foes?
I'm happy to comment on that. And I think the answer is yes, there are religions that are very clearly anthropocentric. And Christianity is the most obvious one, and the one which I imagine people will be quite familiar with. The idea that humans are made in the image of God, but other animals are not. The idea that God gave humans dominion over the other animals, the verse in Genesis, which has been very ruthlessly interpreted in the past to say that it doesn't matter what we do to animals. Essentially, you know, there's a whole line of Christian thinkers from Thomas Aquinas, well, going back actually before Thomas Aquinas to Augustine even, and then Aquinas, and then even Kant, basically saying we have no duties to animals. And although Kant doesn't explicitly relate it to the Dominion verse, certainly Augustine and Aquinas do. So, and then the idea that only humans have immortal souls as well. So I think all of these things are clearly anthropocentric and clearly have been a barrier to including animals within the moral sphere. So that's very negative. If you ask about religions that have more positive attitudes, well, certainly Buddhism seems to have a more positive attitude, because I remember visiting Buddhist temples in Japan, and you were given a kind of admission tickets, and on the back of the ticket it said, the first precept of Buddhism is compassion for all sentient beings, which is wonderful. But then I started asking, so does this mean that all the Buddhist monks are vegetarians? No, not exactly. Some of them, and some of the sort of stricter Buddhist groups might have been, but they were generally not. And certainly, Buddhist countries don't have overwhelming percentages of vegetarians. They may have some, but I think the fundamental message of Buddhism can be resurrected. And I've recently engaged in a dialogue with a female Buddhist monastic called Chao Wei from Taiwan, which we're publishing next year sometime, which and she's thinks that Buddhists really ought to be vegetarians, that it's not compatible with being Buddhist to ignore the suffering of non-human animals. So that's that's just one example that where I think there is a stronger basis. And perhaps I should say, to be fair to some of my Christian friends who are concerned about animals, there has been a bit of a movement recently to change the attitude of Christian teaching. And Pope Francis also reinterpreted that Dominion verse in a recent encyclical. And so I think there's some signs of a change, a softening of the harshness of many centuries of Christian teachings about animals. And I encourage all those Christians who are working in that area to continue and hopefully to prevail in terms of really influencing the thinking of the Christian churches.
Thanks, Peter. That's very helpful. We've got another question that may be more directed at Paula. It's a legal question. And the question basically goes, legal personality is often equated with holding human rights. But that's a problem because legislators are then not willing to extend legal personhood to animals because it implies that the whole set of human rights comes with it. How do we overcome this potential issue?
Well, I don't think so. I mean, problem. I just wanted to say one thing about religion. I read a quite extensive report on how African religions were against eating apes. And it is the arrival of Christianity that has persuaded many Africans that, we are completely different. They might look, because they live so close to each other, that of course they are sometimes very well aware of their cognitive capacities just because they see them all the time. And it was Christianity that persuaded them that they were really completely different and they have been put in the world to serve us. No? And so you can trace areas where eating of the great apes is more common to areas with more Christianity, or Muslims are second after the Christians into eating. And the other thing that I found is that if Christians found the Great Ape Project unsettling, because the more they read about their similarity, they begin to wonder, why couldn't they have souls and go to some kind of ape heaven? And then the whole thing becomes very implausible. So it has an impact on the on faith. No? At the moment, I have in my master course, Otto Obonga, I mentioned this to Peter. He was a member of parliament in Uganda for 20 years, and he is planning to finish his thesis and run for president. And he is a Christian, and that is exactly his attitude. He says, well, I can't really, I am so impressed by all of these cognitive capacities and everything, but if I follow the line, it is going to give me a crisis in my faith as a Christian, because then, why only humans have souls, and, why all of these things we say to humans. And that happened also the first time I was presented in Parliament, that the first people to react was the church, in saying, how can these people, they don't even respect embryos, and they are wanting to defend apes. But then they changed their mind, and even the same bishop that made the first negative claims to the media then said that, on second thoughts, maybe we shouldn't be doing these things to the great apes. And he just, he said he was taking out of context and sort of reacted without much reflection. But really, the Catholic Church should be encouraging compassion rather than cruelty to animals and so on. And the other person that reacted negatively was the then president of Amnesty International, who also then later issued an apology, saying that, human rights come first and so on. But the connection between legal personhood and human rights, I don't know why this person is, thinking that this is a standard view. What is a standard view is not even like the dominant view, but it's a very well-established view that in law, if you have rights, you are a legal person. But all rights, not necessarily human rights. So it is possible for us to claim that human rights are for humans, and they have all of these rights that are in the 33 articles of the Declaration, a very long list of rights. And then only 3 rights for the great apes. Then it's a separate issue whether those 3 rights are sufficient for legal personhood on that theory. And so that becomes a problem for those who have defended this tradition that legal personhood and rights come together. So what it means to be a legal person is to have a right, and vice versa, which is one school of thought that is very influential, dominant, but is by no means the only one.
Great, that's very helpful, Paula. And in fact, we've arrived at the end of the hour already. I'm sorry to all the questions we didn't get to answer, but I would like to take this opportunity to thank our panelists, Paula and Peter, for having launched their book here in the series. Thanks also very much to Carolina for her very interesting comments on the book, and thanks also to everyone for joining us today. We have one more event this term on December 1st. Peter Neeson is going to join us here in the Talking Animals series. So do check our website, animalrightslaw.org, if you'd like to join for that event too. But Peter and Paula, you can hear all the virtual applause, I'm sure, from the attendees now. And yeah, thanks again very much for being here with us today.
Thanks very much, Rafael. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Rafael and Carolina.
Yes, and thanks, Carolina, for your remarks to start us off. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you. Bye.